Hi, I'm KS Garner, and you're listening to the Solo Nerd Podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with the creator and writer of the comic series Twin Blades, Jarred Lujan, here to promote the comic's second installment, Twin Blades, Blood and Obsidian, currently on Kickstarter. Welcome, Jarrett.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today. But outside my introduction, who is Jarrett Lujan, and what are you about?
So I am a Mexican American comic writer from Texas. I've been a member of the Mad Cave Studios Talent Search winner. I'm a DC Milestone initiate of the 2022 class. Other than that, I'm just a writer. I've been in comics for about 6 years, and what my stories that I really like telling. I like telling these really big, bombastic stories, usually revolving around existentialist themes, things like responsibility, despair, the individual, things like that. Um, and usually, I like to write about, my culture in a way that is distinct from how it's often presented.
Mhm.
I don't do immigration stories. I don't do cartel stories. I don't do Dia de los Muertos stories. I do stories about Mexicans and Mexican culture that is independent from those things.
Uh-huh. So how has the response been since you write being a Mexican American and writing these like Latin stories from the perspective of someone who actually like lives this culture, who actually has probably better knowledge of it than what is probably taught in schools or is told in the public. So how has the response been creating stories like this and putting it out to the public?
Originally, it was really hard, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm from the border. Like I grew up in a town that's about 3 miles from Mexico. I have a lot of relationship with Mexico. I knew undocumented people growing up. I'm very, very close with my culture and my history. Um, when I was coming up, there was definitely an expectation for me to do border stories and immigration stories, and that's kind of where I was. It felt like the only work people wanted to give me was work related to immigration, and that was the first thing I was like, okay, I'm not going to do these stories then. Like, I'm not going to tell them because I don't want to be pigeon. I don't want to be shoehorned. I think is the word I'm looking for, or pigeonholed is the other one. I don't want people to think that I can only do one kind of story and that there's only one kind of story a Latin person can do. So I kind of stopped asking for permission and went to Kickstarter. Fortunately, I did have Dryfoot with Mad Cave Studios before my first Kickstarter book, which is a story about the barrio and where like in neighborhoods that I grew up in, and but then I went to Kickstarter to do my own stories, and so I've done 3 books. This is my third book on Kickstarter. All of them have featured Mexican characters. The Twin Blades in particular is like super Mexican. That's kind of its like whole bit. And we've seen a response. We've seen a response not just from readers, right? People who back it, people who are really into it, but my career is picking up, thankfully, and so we're seeing a response from people who maybe weren't looking for that originally, but are seeing that there's an audience for those kinds of stories.
Well, speaking of Kickstarter, what is the comic series Twin Blades about, and what can readers expect from this second issue, Blood and Obsidian?
So the Twin Blades is supposed to be a fun series. It was really a series I wanted to write that you could come home after a long day at work, crack it open, and get a little bit of the Mexican culture, but have fun reading the book, right? Like just big bombastic action, nonstop, like 44 pages. So that, like, I always tell people that the Twin Blades is literally just giving Mexicans swords, is the whole bit. Um, so in the first one, we had these two like new wielders of these two magical swords, or they're Makuhutu. They're old Nahuatl Mexica cultural weapons. They're big clubs with little blades in them, usually obsidian. And so in the first one, it was a kind of a sci-fi mix with that kind of a story. So we
Mhm.
had kind of a sci-fi and fantasy mix. that was a lot of fun to do. And then with Blood and Obsidian, we wanted to do a completely separate story, right? We wanted to do something independent and something that you didn't need to read the first one to read the second one. And so Blood and Obsidian takes place about, man, I think it's like in the 19th century, and it centers around the Battle of Puebla, which is the really famous Cinco de Mayo. Everybody thinks Cinco de Mayo is just like Mexican Independence Day. It's not. It's actually it's a battle of the French invading Mexico, and Mexico had just gotten out of a multiple year civil war. They had been fighting and killing each other for several years, and then the French came in an effort to colonize this country again, and lost to an army that was way more tired, way less trained, and half the size of the French army. And it's always been one of my favorite historical moments. It's one of those really cool, big moments that you can kind of find a lot to be inspired from. So we went there, and this one's more of a Western. It's got, it's got Western and old Kurosawa samurai vibes, and it's about a wielder who's really good at it. She's already very good at being a wielder, unlike our first two protagonists, and she's kind of trying to figure out who killed her sister, and she kind of finds herself thrust into this middle of this war in an effort to find who killed her sister. And so it's a really, again, it's a very intense story. It's a very big actiony story. So there's going to be a lot to love. If you did read the first one, you'll find a lot more to read and love in the second one. But it's also just like a little bit more of a serious story this time. It's a lot more emotional than the first one was.
Mm-hmm. So can you elaborate a bit more on your creative process on Twin Blades? Even it can be the first one, it can be this one, Blood and Obsidian. So from just a thought in your head to outlining the story and wanting to incorporate some of those historical events in like actual places into the story, and mixing in a lot of like fantasy sci-fi elements as well, character creation, finding collaborators to work with, like, into now promoting it on Kickstarter. So like that whole pretty much from start to finish.
Yeah. So, we the way that I approached Blood and Obsidian is really rooted in how I approached the first Twin Blades.
Mm-hmm.
The first Twin Blades, I wanted a character like Xiomara, who is she's confident, but she kind of finds herself being doubted by the people she loves. And so when you're going into that, it's like, okay, so I don't want to make a story that is going to shine a bad light on my people, and I don't want to make a story that feels like we have to center the story about colonialism or something like that. I wanted to make it, and so I set it in the future, right? We have a cyborg, that resurrected dead man who's become a cyborg, as the villain. And I really, but when I was sitting there writing it, it was, I want to make the story as distinct and unique and fun as I can. And so taking it to the future, we got to envision Mexico as a futuristic society, right? Like, in ways that it isn't typically shown. And we got to touch on, we wanted to get out of the cartels, so we set it far in the future, so we never even had to reference them.
Mm-hmm.
We got these two teenage kids who are having a rough relationship, but it's about them. It's about them and their relationship. And so when I wrote Blood and Obsidian, when I was approaching Blood and Obsidian, I wanted to do the opposite of everything I did in the first book, right? Like, we had characters in the first one that were really unseasoned. They were real new to it. In this one, our main character is really seasoned. Like, she's been a wielder for a long time. We in the first one, we had it was a sci-fi story. It had sci-fi elements. This one, we set it several hundred years in the past. I think people are still going to see a little bit of the sci-fi edge with some of the stuff that we have in there, but it's mostly like it's mostly a historical fiction book. We had two wielders in the first one. So we have one wielder in this one.
Hmm.
And so it was really me breaking my own rules of how I'd written the first Twin Blades. Because I don't want to create something that feels like I'm just writing, Twin Blades. Okay, it's the same story. Now it's set in a different time period. I really wanted to do something that was different. And so when I decided I wanted to make it like a Western, which was early in the process, because I'm from Texas, I'm a big Western guy. Uh, I decided I wanted to make it a Western, and I was kind of like, you know, well, where can I set this in Mexico? That would make sense. And Cinco de Mayo was the biggest. It was, like I said, it's one of my favorite historical moments. So it's one of those things that I just naturally came to. So we made the book in it was conceived by being the antithesis of the first one.
Hmm.
It's a little, like I said, it's a little bit more serious than the previous book as well. But in terms of taking it to Kickstarter, like Julio and I created the first Twin Blades, and we have our colorist Rocco, and my goal is to always have as much of the book done as I can before I go to Kickstarter. So we've got like 15, 16 pages done. uh we're kind of picking away at it, but we're ahead of most of our deadlines, so we're doing good. But like everybody's gotten so much better since the first book, like
Yeah.
just noticeably better. And that's something that's really exciting to see. Like if you look at the first pages for the Twin Blades and look at the first pages for Blood and Obsidian, it's just so noticeable how good everyone's gotten. So yeah, so when we put those pages up, we knew, like, this is going to be something people are going to have to pay attention to, and it was very, very exciting. But it is a long process, writing something that is not even a sequel but a second installment, is as a different independent story. It was pretty brutal, but it's one of those things that you kind of come up with, and you kind of just roll with. And that's kind of my writing style, right? Is I kind of find my way as things unravel, as they
Uh-huh.
kind of roll forward. I kind of figure out how I want to do, um, how I want things to go. And so, starting from the point of I want this to be the opposite of the first Twin Blades, I just kind of went and created everything from there.
Uh-huh. So I guess my question would be is it easier to do like two separate installments where you don't have to worry about consistencies, or would you prefer, I mean, in this instance you wanted to go as far left as possible, but as you did that, were there times you were like, it would have been easier if I just did a sequel to the first one, or did that ever come up?
Yeah, yeah. We discussed a sequel, a direct sequel, but
Mhm.
the thing with it is that, to me, Twin Blades is as much a celebration about my culture as it is a story about, having fun. Like the whole team's Latin. Three of us are Mexican. Two of us live in Mexico right now. Um, so there we discussed doing a sequel, and I honestly think doing a sequel probably would have been easier. It probably would have been an easier sell. We had people who were already interested in the characters that we had done in the first Twin Blades, but it felt like we had already told that story that we wanted to tell.
Uh,
And we have these magical swords that have been around canonically in the Twin Blades universe. They've been around since the creation of our entire universe. So we were like, we can't just waste it on a direct sequel when we have so much space that we can play with. um so yeah, we decided that that was our move, is taking the story and working backwards, almost. And so yeah, I definitely think it would have been easier. There's definitely conversations about it, but at the end of the day, we wanted to showcase a different side of the story, as well as expanding on the world that we had built, while also getting to draw stuff that's just different, getting
mhm.
to write characters that are different, draw things that are different, make scenes that are different. I think creatively it was probably easier to go this way, but in terms of like making it and selling it, it's definitely a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really interesting, especially when the topic of like world building comes up, when you have to like build your own rules and this, that, and the third, especially with these historical events and moments and people that are involved in this fiction that you're creating. So instead of just doing like 1 through 5 and then going into another installment worrying about consistencies, you kind of just cut all that out and went straight to it, which sounds really interesting. I feel like, a lot of people don't really go that route. I don't think I've ever really heard anyone ever go that route before, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's fun, like
Yeah.
I'm a big I really do believe that stories should be allowed to end. And I feel like we told the story with Xiomara and Basilio in the first one, and it just felt like there's just so much to explore. Like, how could we just do a direct sequel?
Yeah. But you spoke about your team and you all being Latin. How was it searching for collaborators, and then what made you decide on your current collaborators that you have now?
Yeah, so Julio Suarez does our line art for the book. I found Julio on the hashtag Latinx Create on Twitter.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where I whenever that event goes on, I kind of spend a lot of time looking at it, because I like working with other Latin people. I like showcasing what we can do. And again, Twin Blades was almost entirely conceived to showcase Latin talent in comics. So finding Julio was the trickiest part, right? Like I had to kind of hunt him down a little bit on the Twitter hashtags. But Julio actually knows Rocco. They're both in Mexico. They're both friends in Mexico. So I didn't have to do anything. I just kind of asked him if he had anybody he liked. And he said, yeah, I've got this friend. And Rocco, they have an incredible portfolio. I'm really excited for their career. And then Gabriella Downey, she's a letterer, or she's done some lettering work for DC Comics. She's working on her own OGN. She's done a bunch of covers, and fortunately, we have a cover from her in the campaign this time around. But she's great, and I was fortunate enough that I had a friend who had just worked with her, and so I was like, hey, I know Gabriella Downey is Latin. I think she's from her family's from Argentina or Honduras. There's some explanation for why she's got a Scottish name. She told me it and I forgot. But I'm pretty sure she's Honduran. But long story short is, like, I had a friend. I was like, hey, I know Gabby is Latin. Do you know if she's got some availability? And fortunately, I was able to get her email and reach out. But yeah, it was a little bit easier than I expected, to be quite honest. Once I found Julio, everything else kind of fell into place. But this time around, we have 2 variant covers. There's Andrea Rosales, right? Andrea Rosales did the original logo for the Twin Blades. She's also a member of the DC Milestone Initiative this year. And then Lucas Gattoni did our installment logo for Blood and Obsidian. He just added to Andrea's logo, and he's from Argentina. And we have variant covers from JJ Lopez and Nikki Rodriguez. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. It's Nikki Rodriguez. And then we have another cover by Gabriella Downey. So like, we expanded it. We actually went out and made more Latin people part of the project, which was fun, and fortunately I've gotten to the point in my career where that's a little bit easier than it was before. And so it was definitely a little bit more difficult than my normal projects, because normally I'm just like, hey, I have friends that I want to work with, and I'm like, hey, do you have time? Like, are you available? But I had to go out and find Julio, because I didn't have anybody. All of my Latin friends that were drawing at the time were busy, and I wanted somebody with this really manga influenced style, and Julio fit all the bills, and I'm grateful that he's the co-creator on the book.
So after everything, even with Twin Blades, the first one, the second one you're now currently promoting, and even with your previous projects or anything else you may be thinking about doing, just like, what advice could you offer to other writers or artists or creators in general that you wish someone would have told you when you first started?
This is a popular one, right? Most creators have probably heard the one I'm going to say, but it's the one that I wish that I had taken to heart when I first started.
Mm-hmm.
You do not need to pitch a 100-page OGN. You do not need to pitch a 12-issue maxi series. Start small. Start small, small pages, 3 or 4 pages at a time, and learn the real ins and outs of writing comics.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of good advice out there from a lot of great people, but that's always the thing I tell people is like, don't do that. Don't start big. Don't go crazy. Like, start small and work your way forward. From like a Kickstarter perspective, like, let me back that up. The second piece of advice is don't wait for someone to give you permission to do the stories that you want to do, because that's been the biggest thing that's kept my career alive, right? Because I'm about to have another book in Diamond, or I'm going to have a book in stores next week, called Crash and Troy, and but it's been 2 years since Dryfoot was in stores,
Mm-hmm.
and which was my first published miniseries that was in stores. So I haven't had a book by me, written just by me, in years, but I've been able to stay active with the people that read Dryfoot and with the people that support my career. I've been able to stay active with them because I've been doing Kickstarter books, and I've been doing a lot of anthologies as well. But like, to me, it's like, do your own stories and push them, because comics, it's real easy to forget people in comics. It's built into the format of the monthly readership. Uh, if you don't release something on a regular basis, people are going to forget you ever did anything. And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, I don't wait for a publisher to give you permission. If you got a story, just get out there and try and kickstart it, is the best advice that I can give. And don't, like, I see people launch like 22, they want to do a 60 something page story, or they want to do a mini series. So, but I even think that's too much, right? Like, all the books I've done on Kickstarter have been one shots, and they've been 44 pages, and so we've been able to keep our budget low, our printing costs low, because at the end of the day, you got to realize, like, this is going to be a multiple thousands of dollars project if everybody's getting paid, except me. But yeah, like, but you can take a one shot, you could do 22 pages, and you can do that on Kickstarter pretty easily. That's a pretty cheap book to print, um, but yeah, and never be afraid to ask other creators for advice. Never be afraid to reach out to, especially me, right? Like, I'm busy all the time. Sometimes it takes me a while to get back to people, but uh, like, I'm always really happy if somebody has Kickstarter questions, if somebody and it has comic writing questions, you can always reach out, to me at least, and I can get back to you when I can. But like, don't wait for permission. Start
Mm-hmm.
small. Don't ask anyone for permission. Just do it, because if you wait for permission, no one's going to give it to you,
Yeah.
ever. It doesn't. Indie comics is a hard hustle. It's a difficult grind, and if you wait for a publisher to tell you that it's okay for your story, then you're going to be spending a lot of time on stories that don't go anywhere. You know, that was part of the whole reason I went to Kickstarter, is that I was like, man, I'm like tired of writing pitches that don't end up anywhere. I have
Mm-hmm.
all these stories I want to tell, and I can't tell them because I don't have a publisher. And then I saw people like Fell Hound, who's a good friend of mine, and Frankie White, who's a good friend of mine, who just decided they were going to do their crazy ideas and just stick it on Kickstarter. I think Frankie is like a genius, right? Like, Frankie did a book called Project Starless Daydream, and it was like he pitched it as the finale to the anime that never existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really crazily put together book, and that book is what inspired me to go on a Kickstarter, because I was like, this book is so nuts. Like, there's no way that book would have existed at a traditional publisher. Um, ever, because it's nuts. It's a crazy book, and it's put together in a very, very unique way. And but Frankie did it, and he did it because he didn't ask anybody for permission. He just wanted to make it, and he just went out and he made it. And so like that's what made me go to Twin Blades. That's what made me go to Kickstarter. So don't wait for permission. Just if you have an idea that you really can't get out of your head, um, and just condense it, because you don't want to
Yeah.
run. You don't want to run a Kickstarter for a 20 issue book. Like find a story idea that you have in you that's really itching at you that you can do in one shot, and I'm telling you, that's like the move. That's how you start building an audience, and that's how you
Yeah.
start keeping your name in the movement.
Uh-huh. Well, Jared, you spoke of, being busy and, especially now with the Kickstarter, it's like maybe what, 2 weeks left in the Kickstarter. So now it's like really, really busy for you. But throughout the whole process, do you or did you ever get overwhelmed? Does it ever become too much? And how do you typically manage your mental well-being when it does? And it doesn't have to be just with the Kickstarter. It can be trying to juggle the Kickstarter while also juggling, your home life and work if you have like a part-time, full-time job, family, or just time for yourself.
Yeah, so I have a full-time day job. I have my comics work, I have a wife, I have a teenager, and so I'm like pretty much at home in the overwhelm, but um one of the things that I do is I make it a point to, like, with this Kickstarter, this one, right? Like my first two funded within like 5 days. This one's going on 2 weeks and still getting funded. And we all know that like the economy is in a different place than it was when I ran my last one. And I'm sure that's part of it. But so this one's been particularly stressful. But I my whole thing is right, like the book could fail. I don't think it is. I mean, we're within $600 of funding, but it could fail. And if it did, I would just put it back on Kickstarter in a couple months. like it's not going to deter me. And that's kind of the thing I need to remind myself is like, sure, maybe this isn't the exact right story, because I believe in the book. I believe in the art for the book. I believe in our creative team. So to me, it's not like, oh, okay, well, my writing sucks. Well, no, maybe, but at the bare minimum, I can just retry it again and give it another shot in a different way. Um, but I think it's one of those things where like you really have to be disciplined with letting you take time off. Get it if you have a deadline, get as far ahead of it as you can from the jump, right? And that way you give yourself time to have a break if you need one, because I'm someone who's really outspoken about their mental health. I went through a really hard time a few years ago in 2016, and but having everything that I have to do right now, I set like Tuesday nights are my nights where I cook dinner for my family, hang out with my wife, and I don't do any work. If you need something from, because right now I work weekends, I work all the time. Tuesday is the only day, like Tuesday evening is the only day that like I don't do anything, because that's my time with my wife. That's my time to watch a movie with her, to hang out with her, cook dinner for the girls, um, things like that. And that's been really beneficial to me, in a big way. But that's one of those things that you just have to decide, like, no, I'm not going to do something today because I am really overwhelmed. I had a day on this campaign where I was like, this is stressing me out. I'm not even going to tweet about the campaign. The Kickstarter algorithm can do its job. And I didn't. I just hung out and I didn't tweet about it. I was just kind of relaxing for the day. And I was like, I'm just going to take my foot off the gas for today because I can't keep doing it. So, my best advice is to pay attention to yourself and how you're reacting to things and what it's doing to you. Like, Kickstarters are stressful. They're never going to not
Mm.
be stressful. Um, they're stressful from the second that campaign launches until you're figuring out how to print the book and everything. But at some point, you really need to pay attention to yourself, because if it's really driving you crazy, just take a day. Take a day. Let the Kickstarter algorithm work. Tell your friends, hey, if you could include it in one of your other, if somebody else's campaign or something like that, because that's a lot of that on Kickstarter where we share campaigns and updates. But don't ever know, nothing is worth your health, right?
Yeah.
Not Mexicans with swords, not comics, none of that is worth your health. So always be aware that you can step away, and you can kind of give yourself a break, and that means something. And that's an important part for you as much as it is for your work, because nobody wants, if you're really strung out and going crazy, you're going to write like shit. Oh, I'm sorry, you're going to write poorly. um you're going to do your art poorly, something's going to suffer. And so it's easier and better for you to pay attention to your body, pay attention to how you feel, and take breaks when you need them.
Mhm.
Period. Like, I've been working two jobs essentially since I was 18. Like I'm kind of acclimated to this
Yeah.
kind of craziness in my life. Um, but I still take day, but that's because I have a strict day. Tuesdays I'm just hanging out with my wife. We're hanging out, making dinner. We're spending time together. Like that's it. I'm not going to play with any of this other stuff. Yesterday we went, or Monday we went and got a massage together. Massages are awesome. If you want a mental health thing, that's the move right there. But yeah, it's just being disciplined, and that you need to have a break as much as anybody else. Like you can't
Uh-huh.
do it 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my last question for you, Jared, is what is your idea of success? So I ask that because as creators, if we're not getting regular paychecks from a full-time job or making consistent revenue from our art, we're considered failures, or we may consider ourselves failures. Many of us will put our dreams and project on the back burner or give them up altogether because this career path can be highly intimidating and competitive. So what is your idea of quote unquote success?
Um, I feel like I've sort of already achieved my big idea of success, right? Like I wanted to tell stories, and I'm doing it, through publishers. I'm doing it on Kickstarter. Uh, and so like to me, getting, my second book in stores was a big deal to me because, when I was growing up, where I grew up from, I wasn't really supposed to do anything with my life. I was supposed to be dead or in jail by the time I was like 25. Uh, I'm fortunate enough, I have my college degrees, I have um, books that are coming out, but when I drop dry foot, right, it's easy to say, oh, that's a fluke. You know, Anybody who tries enough will eventually get something through, but to get a second book through, is means a lot to me. It's a lot like, I also boxed a lot as a kid, and so I think the idea of like, oh, anybody can become champion, but it's the champ that defends it. That's the real thing. So I think that's kind of where that's coming from, is getting my second book in there. It's not just a fluke. Like I can do this, and I can do it well. And so, but aside from that, right, like I would love to write full time, um, and I'd be happy with that. But I could never touch a big two character in my life and be good. Like that's not my dream in comics. I would love to. It'd be great, but it's not my dream. My ultimate dream is to contribute stories that I believe in and that I think shine a bigger part of my culture into the fray. I want more Mexicans in comics. I want more Latin people in comics. I want more Latin people everywhere. And so, success only means as much to me as it means that I can help people. So if I can help bring more Latin people into comics, that's what I want to do. If I can help uplift those voices, then that's what I want to do. Um, but as somebody who's working a lot, has worked two jobs most of his life, I would love to write full time and just write. But at the end of the day, to me, what it's always about is like I get to tell stories, I get to do it, and that's great. And I want to uplift those voices that I want to see more of, and contribute to those people's success as well.
Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on about Twin Blades, Blood and Obsidian, or the story just in general, that I may have missed, or maybe rewards for potential backers?
Yeah, we have really cool. I hope everybody backs it. Obviously, I hope they back it soon because we have really cool stickers that are coming up for our stretch goals. And that's going to be really fun. If we get enough, we're going to do another. If we get to our second stretch goal, we're going to do like another little mini comic set in the universe for the digital. But no, like other than that, I just hope people go on and check it out, at least see if it's for them, and give it a chance because it's a pretty good book, I think.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Yeah. All right. Well, again, I want to thank the creator and writer of the comic series Twin Blades, Jarreds Lujan, for joining us here today to promote the comic's second installment, Twin Blades, Blood and Obsidian, currently on Kickstarter. I highly recommend our listeners to give Jarred's Kickstarter a look, share, and back if they can. All of Jarred's socials and website will be listed in this episode's details alongside the Kickstarter link for those who are interested. Again, I am KS Garner, and you have been listening to the Solo Nerd Bird podcast. Thank you.